Hi, it's Janet, and I'm here for Writing Wednesday, and trying to get that situated. I'm just back from a writing retreat that I led up in our local mountains of Idlewild, um, and it was absolutely magic. It was 14 participants and myself in a dome in the pines, talking about issues of writing, talking about whatever it was that came up in discussion. So it was super fun. Uh, hey Jan, um, so it was super fun and really intense. We got into a lot of sense, uh, looking at the uses of senses, the uses of you know, paying it of attention in fiction. And that was wonderful. Had such a good time. And today's Writing Wednesday, I had a letter from a fellow writer with a really good question. And this is the question of, when do you give up? Whoa, not something people talk about, but certainly something that I have seen both sides of. I've experienced both sides of it. And let's read her letter to you. She says, here's a question. When do you put a manuscript away? I'm dealing with this now. I'm 5 years into my novel, a couple of major revisions. Started out in third, recast it in first, present, recasting it again back in third, thinking, should I work out the story better, leave it in the point of view it's in, or recast it in the first person past tense? Or is it good that it's going into third person past tense, but what a headache. Agents have seen various iterations and never complain about the writing, but they say things like, I don't get enough of the character, or the story doesn't quite jive. So I think, recast in third person present tense. Will that give me enough distance to work on character development and story? Or should I just junk the whole thing and work on other things? There's no lack of ideas in my head and the beginnings of things. So how do you decide? Okay, now this is a question that, if any writer who's been writing for some time has had this question. Do I stay or do I go now? If I stay, there will be trouble. If I leave, it will be double. A little punk rock for you. The question of giving up on a manuscript. Now, I have had experiences with this with myself and with others. I've been in a workshop with somebody who has worked on various iterations of the same book for a decade, changing it, when it really didn't require those violent changes. It just needed to be, fully, finished all the way to the end, brushed up, and set out. And something about the critique of the group led this person to keep changing it. So every 2 or 3 years, it became a different novel. This person cut it, it was a large novel, getting larger, and somebody was saying, a minimalist, who she is not a minimalist, but a minimalist, was giving her input, and she shrunk it to cut it to the bone, so all that was joyous about it disappeared. Then it got bigger, got smaller, got bigger, got smaller, and I don't know where this person is on that novel 12, 15 years later. I know somebody who has started a novel, who just thought that this was going to be it. It was great. It was going along, and then life intervened, and there was a lot of turmoil, and then it was like they lost touch with the original impulse that made them want to write that novel in the first place. But when we talk about novel writing, we're talking about years. We're talking about 10 years. We're talking about 5, 10, 15 years of labor. So we're talking about significant slices of people's lives. This is no light matter. I myself, I had a novel that failed, and I had been working it out for 3 years. It was the novel that came after White Oleander, and it was going to be even bigger and more epic, a historical novel set in the 20s. And I took 2 stabs at it. It was 900 pages of manuscript, and it just never, ever came together. So finally, I just broke down. I was suicidal, and it's no wonder that the story, I went through old short stories, and I found a story that was about the aftermath of suicide. There were 3 characters, and one of them was dead. So I thought I could handle this, and gradually relearned how to write, because I was just destroyed. That novel destroyed me. But one of the characters turned out to be an emigre from the Russian Revolution, and actually began to, after Painted Black, I was able to work with this character and the Revolution of Marina M. and its sister volume that's coming out this summer, Chimes of a Lost Cathedral, came out of that book. So in a way, I couldn't have written those 2 books, the 2 Russian books, without having written that failed novel. Nor would I have written Painted Black, because I would never have been in that emotional situation where I was in that dark place that that seemed like a book I wanted to write. And Michael Chabon famously had a failed novel that I guess a portion of it has been published with his notes of why it failed. But he does say that Wonder Boys, which is a book about writer's block, he wouldn't have written Wonder Boys, and he wrote it in eight months. So this is a very interesting question about when do you give up. I certainly have I know an Australian writer who was writing a Russian novel, and it just about killed her. She always told me, don't write a Russian novel. Do not write a Russian novel. And 20 years later, her book was finished. But you have to think about what could she have written if she had not written that book. So when you're dealing with despair, when you're dealing with writer's problems, it's not as easy as these how-to books of take it off the shelf and do this and do that. And it's like, you know what? It's not that easy. So how do you know? Here's somebody who's been working 5 years on a book, and she's changing the point of view. Should I stay or should I go? Well, first, let's talk about how to avoid this in the first place. As I was, I taught this writer's retreat, and I urge people in my fiction writing classes, I urge people everywhere, do not write a novel. Write short stories, even if you're not a good short story writer. Think of a short story as a laboratory, and you can see how this dish is going to turn out, or at least know a lot more about it before you start onto this, journey across the high seas. Do not take the journey across the high seas until you have tried the boat in shallow water. Try it on a pond. See if it holds water. I don't care if you don't like short stories. I don't care if you don't read short stories, if you're not interested, and if you're not any good at them, you know. Some people are sprinters and some people are milers. And I'm a miler. Even when I was a kid, you know, I ran the mile. I could not get off the blocks. I was the slowest 50-yard dash in a class of 125 because it took me a while just to get it, that it was starting. You know, I'm so up in here, and everybody's like all the way there. They're halfway to the finish line before I like can connect to get going. So I'm very slow getting going, but once I'm going, I'm going. Okay, natural novelist, but having short stories, even if you can't get them published, are such a wonderful laboratory for your ideas. So you can see whether you have enough of a connection to your idea to go further with it. And not every short story is going to become a novel. Very few of them do. It's like dating, you know, date a lot. Date a lot. You know, you try a short story, you spend 3 weeks on it, you ended up not really liking it all that much. At least you explored it. Or you wrote a short story and it was good and you sent it out. When I had that failed novel, I had a notebook full of short stories that I could go back, ideas that I'd started, and think, you know, I always liked that story. I always thought there was more in that story, and I was able to start again. So I usually start short stories with a word, with a flash fiction. I start with a word, a simple word, out of I have a little pouch of words, and I just close my eyes and pick a word. Usually it's a noun and a verb, and I write 2 pages double spaced, 500 words. And a lot of those, you have a lot of them. You can do one every week. You'll have 52 little shorts in a year. And then some of them might lead to short stories because they come up very organically that way. Brick. What are my associations with brick? Okay. I list my associations. I pick one. I write the little short and use the word somewhere in there. And then some of those seem like they have more energy, so I write them as short stories. I'm not a great short story writer, but it's a laboratory where you can try out ideas with it. It's dating as opposed to marrying the person. Don't marry the story until you're darn sure that there's enough there that makes you want to keep going. Many people have said, many famous writers have failed novels. You know, you're not the only one. You start working on your NaNoWriMo novel, and it was great for that purpose, but you keep working on it and you go, this is just not coming together. This is all over the place. I don't even know how to shape it, and I really don't care. Suddenly, you're seeing that you haven't wasted any time. You've been in the laboratory and you've experimented and you've found something that's kind of cool, but do I really want to marry it? I don't even want to become engaged. I don't even like him, So use the laboratory. Don't dive into a novel when you still are learning how to when you're still learning how to build a table, don't build a house. So first you get your skills together. You've built a number of tables. They hang together. You built a chair. You've built, a shed. So you get your skills together, but then you also have to know that you're going to be in love with that story, that it's a story you have to tell and not grandma's story, something you have to tell. That's where I went aground. I tried to write a family story where I knew the people. I did research as to, it was historical, but it didn't come out of my own problems, my own being. It came out of other people's problems and other people's beings, and I couldn't sustain it. I couldn't sustain it. A year and a half on that book, and then I tried a different protagonist, which is where Marina came in, getting closer to something that's coming organically for myself and a read, but it never came together. I didn't know enough about her to be able to write that story. Set it aside. And then what do you know? Marina stayed with me, nagged at me. You've got to come back to me sometime. That happens a lot to writers, is that they put it away and then they come back to it. There was a really cool article I stumbled across in thinking about this. That was in the New York Times, March 4th, 2011. Why do writers abandon novels? Yay! That was very interesting, So Shaban, Junot Diaz, John Updike, Jennifer Egan had a novel she abandoned. Stephanie Meyer, Evelyn Waugh, and we all know Truman Capote and Harper Lee abandoned novels. Richard Price has abandoned two in the 70s. He said the latter two novels, I like Price. He said of the second one called Home Fires, the latter of which he said he quit 300 pages in after realizing, quote, the driving force behind the novel was panic about not having a novel. Elizabeth McCracken spent 4.5 years on her third novel, Marvelous, before giving it up. 4 years, 3 years, 5 years. You don't want it to be 12. You don't want it to be 15. If it's not working and you think, God, I could just sit this aside. And if tears of relief are your response, grief and relief, that tells you something. You can set it aside, and maybe it will percolate, and you come back to it in 10 years, in 20 years. That happened to all kinds of people, that they came back. Chang Rae Lee. A lot of first novels fail because people jump into them because they have a beginning, but they just don't know where to go with them. Jennifer Egan had a 600-page first novel that just became unreadable. And it started over and became a different novel. So there's a lot of that. And Stephen King, you would not be the first person to ever set aside a novel. But it's a hard one. When I was working on Marina M. and the sister novel that's coming out this summer, I had a passage from Dorothy Allison in front of me that said, fiction never exceeds the writer's courage. And I kept wondering, year 7, year 8, what the hell am I doing? This is my actual life going down the tubes. Am I crazy? And I keep looking at this, Fiction never exceeds a writer's courage. So I just did my best to hang on by the mane to that galloping horse, that huge freaking thing. Felt like I was building, a Gothic cathedral all by myself. That's not how you do it, But what was the difference between that book and the one that failed, between White Oleander and Painted Black, was I did think I could write it. I knew that it was still alive for me. The characters were still alive for me. I was still following them. I wasn't pushing the train up the hill. I wasn't jumping at straws. I really felt them. I saw them. It was expanding, but it hadn't gone dead to me. It was very much alive. So I hung on to the mane and tried not to fall off just because I was scared. when my ex-husband taught me how to ski, he was a fabulous teacher, but he said, okay, if you fall face forward, I will come and pick you up and dust you off and make sure that, put your goggles back on and give you your poles and stuff. But if I sat down because I was afraid, he would just ski right past me. So in a way, I didn't give up on Marina M because that would have been because I was afraid of it. I was just too big. But on the other hand, people get into things that are just too hard for them. That was another question that the same original question asker, who is actually a wonderful writer, but she's she's where you are. She's doing her thing, and it isn't easy. So she says, what about playing to your strengths? Should you write what comes easiest or make yourself write what's hard? In other words, if you do dialogue well, should you do lots of it and not worry about narrative? If you do narrative well, should you forget about dialogue? I think, everybody has to do everything. You have to learn how to do what you don't do well. And sometimes that becomes the thing that people know about your work, is you do the thing you didn't do at all well. You had to learn to do it, and in fact, it becomes your strength. So to say what's your strength, what's your weakness is sort of, it changes over time. So, but when things come fast and easy, we often think that means it's crap. But the truth a truth that I have found is that if it comes easily, sometimes it is better. That when the strain of pushing something up the hill when it's not alive in itself, when it's not speaking to you, is what takes too much. That's where the time is. That's where, and the strain on the author, you see it in the prose. You see how tired they are. You see that it's not working. So I can really recommend that you don't overlook when something is easy. Don't negate it just because it's easy. Don't negate your strengths just because they're your strengths. I had a very close childhood friend who went to college. She was a fabulous artist, fantastic artist, but it was too easy for her. Her parents wanted her to do something practical, so she majored in biology or something that she had no affinity for, didn't like, but she felt that the other was too easy, that it felt too good. So watch out for your, lack of self-esteem because the thing that you do really easily, even if you feel like, oh my God, but it's a story about the journey of a cat. And I really don't want to, it's a funny story about a cat. This is not, I wanted to write, Macbeth. And I'm writing a funny story about a cat. But if that is what comes to you, honestly, and is the best of what you're doing, people will enjoy it more. You'll enjoy it more. George Saunders was talking about his journey as a writer, and he wanted to be like, I forgot the specific authors, but he wanted to be Melville. He wanted to be Tolstoy or whatever. And so Carver, I think, was one. And he imitated these writers and trying to be like them. And then he said, that there was this like little pile of shit that was what he actually was writing and enjoyed writing, with his name on it. And he said, yeah, but that was my writing. And I had to like switch off the big competition and realize that this was the genuine expression of who he was. And then he wrote that wonderful, started writing these wonderful short stories about weird kind of Civil War land in decline. And And only he could write that stuff. And that's what naturally came to him with all the skills that he'd learned. He didn't just naturally write that stuff, in high school. I mean, he certainly learned his skills as a fiction writer, but that's what he decided, that's me, that's what I have to do. A lot of life as well as art is about self-acceptance and wanting so much to be better than I am. I mean, that is completely you know, that's completely the task in life and art. Marina, in The Revolution of Marina M, thinks a lot about what is our nature? What is our true nature? What is her true nature? And if you follow your true nature, you're going to be much happier. You're going to be more confident. You're going to produce more interesting art that only you could produce. Here's somebody who's been thinking about putting away the pen for good. Oh, no, 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 no. Writers never want to see another writer put away the pen. No. This is just about deciding whether what you're working on is going, if you find yourself more and more in despair, if you find yourself out of touch with the characters, if you find yourself not interested in the story anymore, you want to spend maybe a few months exploring that and making sure that you don't have a break. You could have a breakthrough. You could end up, doing some of these techniques to talk to your characters that I've talked about. You sit down and kind of get into meditative state and let them come and talk to you. Sometimes you hit the 80-page, I don't know enough about these characters to keep going. And that's try to get more information on them. That Lagos Egri book and the three-dimensional character studies, super, super useful. But sometimes the despair is just that this is no longer a thing of joy anymore. This is a duty. This is all about dread and just dealing with your dread. And if you have lost, like I had some of that with Marina M. I've had, some of it with every book. Who's going to care about this? I just don't know what to do. This is shit, blah, blah, blah. But if you have lost your sense of the living quality of that material, set it aside. It could come back. Try to work on shorter stuff. Is there a certain amount of main characters that makes sense? Too many lead characters. Well, that's a different issue. That's an issue of there's only one protagonist, even if there's a lot of main characters. Your protagonist is your point of view character. So that, hopefully that helps. What else do we have? Anyway, this issue of giving up is really a profound one. I don't ever think that writers should give up on writing. There's a reason that you have moved into literary arts. There's an interest, there's a connection with the ability to express thoughts and emotion and the world through words. And why should you give it up? Why should you? When I had written for 10 years and had never published a thing, was never able to get anything published. I just sent it out. I had to ask myself, should I quit writing? So I pictured myself having quit writing on my deathbed, and I realized that I use writing to process how I think about the world. And without it, I don't have a reason to look at things harder, to think again about things. My world would be so infinitely shallower. if I didn't have writing. So I decided I was going to keep writing whether I published anything ever or not. And that was aside from the skill, the craft level. This was my decision to write. Even if I was writing badly, I would have continued to write. But I also continued to work on my skills because I have this level of ambition that I actually want to connect to the outside world and keep hurling myself at that until I absorbed enough to be able to write a story that somebody was interested in. But I cannot more strongly recommend using the laboratory of shorter stories before you take on the big novel. But once you've got it, once you're in the middle of it, that was the original question. Once you're in the middle of it and you find yourself, you're going to try the third person, you're going to try the first, don't rewrite the whole book in third person. Don't rewrite the whole book in present tense. Think of the laboratory. Take a chapter and just try it and see, are you getting more information? Are you more excited about it? Are you seeing things more clearly? Does it excite you more? If it doesn't, stop changing stuff. You gotta think of your life. You're not a redwood. We don't live forever. So you have to think how much time, if I'm having trouble on this mystery novel, I'm writing a mystery novel, not, but if I were to write a mystery novel, people write these, every year. 2 years would be a luxury for Robert Cray or T. Jefferson Parker. 2 years is glorious. 1 year, yeah, get them out. So if you spend 2 years on your mystery and it is not coming together, you lose the, whatever that scent was, whatever excited you about it, it is gone. You might want to write a chapter or a short story about whatever it was that attracted you to that material. Just write a short story and see if you can get it published or not. See if you can recapture your interest in it. If you can't, stop there. Why spend 3? Why spend 4? If the scent's gone cold, if you're a bloodhound and the scent's gone cold, and you're sniffing, and you've gone around every tree, and you've gone down the road, and you've gone into the murder victim's house, and you try it again, and you can't pick up the scent, don't spend 12 years doing that. That is a tragedy. It's a tragedy, and you have to value, so it's always, it's very personal. It's very personal, and there are times that you do lose the scent from time to time. There are times where you don't know how to make a decision. You get to a crossroads in the work and you just don't know what. You try this, nothing seems to be working. Or you're afraid to take one thing and go off. But until you've chosen something, you're going to stay at that crossroads. So take something and go with it. And if it doesn't work, tear it out, come back to the crossroads. Every work is full of those places. But often this is a question of a finished book, or at least first draft done, second draft, sometimes multiple drafts, where the person keeps changing and changing and changing, but it's not getting any better. Or they've got a really complete opener and they know their ending and it's kind of mushy in the middle. That's a little bit of more secure situation, getting the middle to lead you from the beginning to the end. But sometimes books, sometimes books just don't come together. And you write and write and write, and they just it never seems real. You're just pushing paper dolls around. When you find yourself pushing paper dolls around and it's lasting, and you do, the more experienced writer you are, the more you have in your bag of tricks to, as a way to reconnect to that. But if you can go back to where it actually worked and start over, you can, but sometimes it's just not worth it. It's a novel that, Chabon called it a wrecked novel. It's a wreck. And, everybody knows that if it's easier to total out a car than it is to repair something that's just a mess. Luckily for me, I'd started on Paint It Black, after my car wreck, so to speak. And my editor said to send it to him. So I got it out of the house, and he read it and said he saw where I had gone wrong, and maybe someday I'd want to return to that. Unlikely, but I did save the character. I saw where I'd gone wrong. I had another novel that never sold, and I saw where I had gone wrong with that, but I didn't want to put in another 2 years on the book. So it's always, you're weighing how much time, you want to invest in something, and the time is important when you could be doing something with more joy in it, something that comes more organically, something that works to your strengths. You do not have to work to your weaknesses. You do not have to take biology if you are a fabulous artist. Take more art. Do what there's no shame in doing what you're good at. You don't want to be a one-trick pony. You want to develop what you can do, but don't be ashamed of doing the things that are easy and fun for you, and then expand them and make them as good as you possibly can. Maybe it's not a little pile of shit like George Saunders considered his own work versus those people that he admired, because he did become George Saunders, and he mined the thing that he's interested in, and he expanded it, and finally as a novel. But let's see, what else can any questions? Writers never, ever like to see another writer quit writing, because we're people of the pen. We're people who want to think more deeply about life, who want to experience more deeply, who have something to say about life. And it's just making sure that what we do will hold that, and not take us further from it. Here, let's see what I got here. How do you balance writing and life? I don't balance writing and life. But, I write. That's what I do, and I kind of fit life in. It's a dance, sometimes other people need more, and sometimes you need more. There's no hard and fast rules. But it's try not to write a novel or a book. Try thinking of scenes, chapters, short stories, little essays if you're writing nonfiction. Think of working, starting out by working in shorter blocks, so that if things don't pan out, it's not a tragedy. Let's see what we've got here. How do we balance between being creative and writing when we feel overscheduled in relationships? I have something about this, but I'll do this quickly for you. Divide a paper into 4. Upper left-hand corner, important and urgent. Upper right-hand corner, important, urgent, not important. Bottom left, important, not urgent. And bottom right, not urgent, not important. So this is all your, TV and hanging out and doing stuff. Important things lead you to your goals. And if writing is one of your goals, important is necessary to always think of it. Important and urgent is something having to do with your goals, your writing, or say, take 3 things that are important to you: writing, your husband, and your kid, or whatever. So important and urgent are things dealing with your goals that have a clock attached to them. Urgent, not important, are things that have a clock attached to them, but it won't help advance you to your goal. So that's like, the roof needs fixing, the water heater, you have to go to the market, the dog needs to go to the vet, blah, 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 blah. Usually that is just stacked with stuff. Important and urgent maybe has 1 thing, 2 things. And we usually get that done because there's the clock attached. These we get lost in. Then down here, important but not urgent. That's where the money's, that's where your goals are. Nobody cares if you write. Nobody gives a crap but other writers. So important but not urgent is getting the novel done, getting the short stories done, getting them out and getting them in, getting them into submission. If you can put a clock on them, they'll move up, more likely to be done. And then finally, not important, not urgent, all the things that are just goofing around and worrying and doing the internet and all that stuff. Has nothing to do with your goals, has nothing to do with anything, just stuff you do. And so if you take care of what's important and make sure that what's important is on the top of your list, control the urgent but not important. See if you can delegate, see if you can pay somebody to do it if you can afford to do that, see if you can exchange something for something else, But if you think of your writing as an animal that can only eat from your hand and will die if you do not feed it, that's more the sense of that importance of your work in that balancing time, etc. Other people can give your kid macaroni and cheese, but only you can feed your work. How to become a published writer. Oh my God, so many things, read Poets and Writers magazine to begin with, if you want to know about that publication side of things. Writing Wednesday is just going to be dedicated to actual writer issues and your own craft and attitudes towards art. But believe me, Saul Bellow was way into a novel called The Butterfly and the Crab about 2 patients in adjoining hospital beds. Kind of an interesting idea, right? When he dropped it to write The Adventures of Augie March, which was a brilliant book. You have to realize that ideas are a dime a dozen. People will always say, oh, should I copyright my idea? If I send my idea, oh, he stole my idea, or I'm afraid to be in workshop because they'll steal my idea. Ideas are a dime a dozen. And I know that's cliche. Ideas are constant and everywhere. And do not pick stuff to work on because of an idea. Things should come out of who you are, what you believe, what disturbs you, what bothers you, Annie Dillard, I love this, said, the self is the paint box of its inherited contents of obsessions and fascinations, which means everything you write will be a you novel or a you story if you are writing out of who you are. Everything you write will hang together. There's a reason. You have your own brain, your own perspective, and you're much more likely, you write out of your own stuff. That's hot. That's live. That is not going to die on you the way an idea, which is head up. I've got this idea, this high concept, that's the novel that's going to die on you, not something that you care about deeply, something that troubles you. I mean, what, you know, a secret, something that um, that worries you, something that just, it's like becomes that grain of sand in the oyster shell. When you start pushing your paper dolls around, that's the time to stop and ask yourself, what the heck has happened here? And you can work on something too long. It's like eating, my grandmother, God love her, was fabulous. But I remember being at Thanksgiving and getting a thing of turkey in my mouth when I was a little kid and just chewing it and chewing it and chewing it. And the longer you chewed it, the worse it got. And then it was just this flavorless yuck. You can work too long on a book. You can, it gets big and little and, but it's no better. If you want the shape of your first expression, but not necessarily the superficiality of it. So if you are naturally somebody who writes a big fat story or book, or, a maximalist writer, you're going to drive yourself crazy trying to be, the lean, mean Raymond Carver. And you watch whose criticism you take. You can't listen to everybody. Some people get addicted to workshops. So they don't see that this was time to stop workshopping the book and just time to finish it and get it out of there. You've got to have a sense of when to close the door and just finish something yourself and get it out there if you're addicted to workshops. And there's nothing wrong with that. Workshops are really fun. If you want to spend your life going to workshops and meeting people and talking about story, and if that is a huge addition to your life, then the pressure's off. You don't have to perfect anything. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you driving yourself to, extreme measures, if you're working on a book for 12 years or something like that, it's very difficult to either put it aside, or it's like, I can't finish, but I've spent so many years on this, I can't put it aside either. I mean, that's a position you never want to be in. And if you find yourself in that position, it's a terrifying thing, but you might consider putting the book aside and doing something that will be easy for you. And you might get a different perspective on that book. You might be able to take a piece of it and do something else with it. You might regain the confidence to finish it. But, I do, after having had that failed book and having gone through Marina and Chimes of Lost Cathedral, I am going to be so much more aware of time and doing what it is I'm good at, with, of course, adding things that I want to try. But if I can't, if I want to, I think I should be more like, George Saunders, or I think I should be more like so-and-so, I'm going to do that in the laboratory. I'm going to get the short story laboratory, and I'm going to do wild experiments with everything under the kitchen sink to see what it is. But I would never start a novel without feeling very excited about something that I've worked on in the laboratory. So if there are any more questions, let's see, I'm going to be at the LA Festival of Books on Saturday at 3 o'clock with Rebecca Mackay and Lydia Fitzpatrick, which is going to be an amazing panel. Wonderful writers. And then what's coming next? I'm going to be interviewing a student, ex-student of mine, Saskia Vogel, at Book Soup, and I'm going on the 26th, and life goes on, and I'll be posting on my Facebook page, and I'll be posting on my website. And if you're interested in another, I did this retreat in Idlewild, which was unbelievable. So energizing for me as well as for the participants, which is, that's what you want. It wasn't just teaching, it was interacting, which this was great practice for. Just contact me through my website, and I'll put you on a list, and I'll contact you when I have another one. So thank you. I hope this may have answered some questions about how and when and if to ever put work aside. But it'll never be quitting fiction writing. Do not quit. All right. Bye.